What would our days be like if our days and nights were as immersed in nature as they were in technology? By Richard Louv. I chose this quote to start my speech because in today's world, you see a lot more children playing inside in tablets and screens instead of outside. Today, I'd like to talk about the effect that screens have on children physically, socially, and behaviorally, as well as fun alternatives for children instead of screen times. An article on giving kids new outlets appeared in the July 30th edition of the USA Today, revealing an alarming statistic. 61% of babies spend part of a typical day in front of a TV, computer, or screen. By average, 4 or 6 children spend nearly 2 hours plugged into some type of screen. Now, that's a lot of time for children to be spending, especially 4 to 6-year-olds. So, we're going to go ahead and talk about how screen time affects a child physically. When a child is sitting in front of a screen for a prolonged amount of time, they aren't necessarily eating right. They're snacking as they watch the screen or the TV, not really paying attention to the body cues of when they're full. According to an article by Candace Douglas in the July 29, 2017 issue of Manly Daily, children who spend a lot of time using screens may not get enough physical activity, leading to weight gain. On top of weight gain, another way that screen time affects children physically is damage to the eyes. When you're staring at a screen for a prolonged amount of time, it can cause blurred vision or dry eyes. It can also lead to you needing prescription glasses later on in life, as well as if they're watching a screen before they go to bed, they are going to have a harder time going to sleep because the screen is going to mimic daylight. So now that we've talked about how screen time affects children physically, I'd like to talk about how it affects them socially. One of the ways that screen time affects children socially is that they isolate whenever they're on the screen. They're not going to be developing meaningful, long-lasting relationships with family and friends because they're going to be interacting with the screen. They're caught up in a virtual reality instead of the real world. Whenever children are staring at a screen, they're not developing their language skills. A lot of children end up developing communication and their language skills later on. It's prolonging it because they're not interacting with kids. It also causes behavioral problems. It can cause lack of self-control, aggression, and poor judgment choices because they're not using those social skills on a day-to-day basis to learn how to make those good decisions. Instead, they're just staring at a screen. In 2007, a study published in the Crossmark Child Family Study states that spending more time with digital technology devices may cause psychological problems such as addiction, depression, as well as aggressive and violent behaviors. So we talked about how screen time can affect children physically and now socially. So now we're going to talk about how it can affect their brain development. Screen time can cause damage in a child's brain because it's developing whenever they're early on, as well as whenever they're in the middle between 7 to 10. I mean, it's always developing, but it's developing more rapidly, especially whenever they're a baby. So whenever they're sitting in front of a screen for a prolonged amount of time, you're gonna see less gray matter in several parts of their brain. One of them would be the frontal lobes, which oversees things like planning or controlling impulses. The striatum, which is the reward system, which helps control behavior. And then also the insula, which that's going to give them empathy and compassion. So there have been studies that show that there was less gray matter from them staring and using more screens. It can also cause overstimulation in the brain when dopamine, which dopamine is the feel-good feeling that you have inside of your brain, overrides the brain's mechanism that dictates self-control. Dopamine receptors shrink, meaning kids need more of it to get the same effect. So in a way, it's also causing addictions in children in their brain because they're wanting that instant gratification. That's why you do see some children who are addicted to video games because it's releasing that dopamine feeling. and it's setting off a feel good. So their brain is telling them, okay, well, when you watch this screen, it feels really good, so we're going to do it again. And so you have children who are becoming addicted to screens, TVs, tablets, all different types of electronics. There are lots of fun alternatives that parents can do with their children. Some of them would be going outside and doing sports like baseball, softball, even basketball. You can also do Girl Scouts or Boy Scouts versus a girl versus a boy. You could also have your child join extra school curricular activities, which would be like a reading club or a math club for them to learn and not have electronics. And parents can also take their children to the zoo or to museums and interact with them in another way. So, in all this, I hope that you have been informed on the ways that screen time can affect children and the fun alternatives to it. And we can just kind of decide for ourselves if how much screen time we may even want to do, if we want to unplug for a little bit, or we just want to keep things the way that they've always been. Now, it's a beautiful day outside. I myself am going to go out and enjoy the fresh air.